Hi, this is Jason Troxel with Veterans Tanks and Corals. You're here for last week's aquatic news today. I get to share it with you. So here's what we've got going on this week. The algae bloom of doom. Experts have warned a huge algae bloom that is rapidly approaching land in the Atlantic Ocean. And this bloom, which has been monitored over the past couple of weeks, is estimated to be roughly the size of the state of New Jersey. And it's comprised of an estimated 2.5 to 5 million pounds of algae. This bloom is primarily made up of an algae species known as Sargassum weed and Noctiluca scintillans, the latter of which is capable of emitting a bright glow when disturbed. This phenomenon known as bioluminescence, and it can be seen from a distance of several miles. Now, you see the big picture here says this is 5,000 miles wide. Obviously, Jersey isn't that. It's because there's more than one bloom. This is particularly concerning because of potential impacts it can have on our environments. And prior to 2011, these things didn't happen. The algae was a healthy part of our ecosystem. However, we've seen larger and larger blooms. And last year was particularly bad, with more than 20 million tons of Sargassum blanketing the Atlantic. Wow. So the algae formed huge clumps along shorelines in the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, and Florida's East Coast. And Sargassum reeks. So it's not just the fact that it's huge and it's ugly. As the beach seaweed rots, it releases hydrogen sulfide gas. And if you're familiar with that, it has a distinct rotten egg smell. The algae is capable of using up oxygen in the water as it decomposes, which can lead to decreases in oxygen levels and increasing the presence of toxins. So this can have a devastating effect on marine life, as it can lead to decreases in fish populations and increasing the prevalence of invasive species. So bloom, in addition to all the above, can also block out sunlight and reduce the amount of photosynthesis that can take place. This reduces the growth of seagrass and other aquatic plants, which are vital to the health of our ocean. So all of that says, what do we do? Well, the blooms form seasonally as it feeds on two nutrition sources. The first is human-made. The spring and summer runoff flows into the Amazon River, carrying nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, which should sound familiar to our aquarium friends, due to deforestation and fertilizers. So the river water then enters the ocean. The second it starts feeding this algae. So the second source of seaweed food is natural. Winter sea water rises from the deep off of the West African coast, and it also brings a ton of nutrients to the surface. For all intents and purposes, then, controlling this bloom is impossible. Concerns continue that we will see more and more of these types of large-scale feedback mechanisms from the environment. In addition to concerns of oxygenation depletion and impacts to photosynthesis for other living organisms in the impacted area, the death of this much algae could cause issues with large amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, silicon, manganese, iron, calcium, and other trace metals being dumped into our coastal waters. And we know that, right? We're in the aquarium hobby. We see this very same thing with our chaetomorpha and some of our other macronutrients. And we know that it can suck out copper and other bad things for aquariums. Well, it's trapped inside the living organism, but if the living organism dies, then it's releasing all of that back into the water. That's bad news. All right, in addition to that, let's talk about symbiotic relationships between corals and algae. And this is coming from ScienceDaily.com. As ocean temperatures rise around the globe, a research paper published last week from Penn State University here in the US addresses the interesting differences between the impacts to Indo-Pacific corals and Atlantic corals in this rising ocean temperatures. The study highlighted by Science Daily notes that in the face of global warming and other environmental changes, corals in the Atlantic Ocean have declined precipitously in recent years. In other words, they're dying off a lot faster, while corals in the Pacific and Indian Ocean are faring better. So that begs the question, why? Well, corals need a stable environment to thrive. That's not new to us. This includes narrow temperature band, water flow, lighting, nutrient element availability, and supporting environmental factors. Scientists who have been observing coral bleaching events associated with rising ocean temperatures for several decades now, through analysis, an international team led by Penn State, those very famous researchers, have found that these mutualistic relationships from the Indo-Pacific regions between several species of symbiotic algae that corals need to grow may be more flexible and ultimately resilient to higher ocean temperatures than those in the Atlantic. So in another study performed at Princeton University, they confirmed some of this stuff. They said researchers identified that the mutually beneficial relationship between algae and modern corals, and that means all of them, both Atlantic and Pacific, well, provides algae with a shelter and gives coral reefs their color and supplies both organisms and nutrients. So algae is good in this case, and we need it. But this began more than 210 million years ago, so it's not new. And according to the new study by the international team of scientists, including researchers from Princeton University, this is how our corals survive. So what's going on here? Why are there so many different results or such drastic results different between Atlantic and Indo-Pacific regions? Well, like doctors, these symbiotic algae fall into two categories. Specialists, people who work on brains or hearts, and generalists, your family doctor, etc. So the research points out that the corals in the Caribbean waters are more apt to depend on specialized or specialist algae in their symbiotic relationships, whereas the Indo-Pacific corals readily use more generalized algae. The adaptability then in the Indo-Pacific corals gives them an advantage in being able to find the right partner to adapt to the rising temperatures. Specifically, the symbionts that the team described are in the genus of Cladocopium. Cladocopium are exceptionally biodiverse relative to other coral symbionts. Yet very few species from this genus have been successfully cultured, says Matthew Nitschke, research scientist from the Australian Institute of Marine Science. And according to Todd Junase, professor of biology at Penn State, the symbiont species that the team described are important to reef ecosystems because of their ecological dominance, and they're important to so many coral species over huge geographic areas. He did note it is possible that these species may come to dominate coral communities as Earth oceans warm and more sensitive symbiotes die out, so survival of the fittest. That's an interesting case then of algae being good for our coral hobby as opposed to the massive algae blooms across the Atlantic. All right, also not new. We've been hearing this for a long time. Plastic in the ocean has causing issues. This past week, a team of experts consisting of marine biologists, oceanographers, and environmental specialists spoke out about the dangers of plastic pollution, specifically now on coral reefs. We've heard of a plethora of news about the growing issues of plastic pollution accumulating in the oceans, breaking down, entering the food chain, fish being found with this, both small all the way up to mega size. But now we are learning in this latest news, it can be transported to coral reefs where it eventually entangles and suffocates coral reefs directly. Or by smothering them with sediment pollutants, blocking light, reducing coral's ability to photosynthesize, and ultimately leading to decreased growth and a decrease in the reef's vital biodiversity. Beyond the direct impacts, this can also lead to weakened reefs that are more susceptible to disease and other environmental stressors, and that can happen through that environmental chain where fish that would normally tend to corals and their needs are suddenly no longer able to do so. They've been killed off or impacted by plastic. So plastic pollution can also disrupt the delicate food chain, and it can be mistaken for food by fish and other marine animals, and this can lead to intestinal blockages and other health problems for the animals, and also affect their ability to reproduce. So bad stuff all around. Technology is working on solutions to reduce our dependencies on plastics, which in turn will reduce the amount of plastics that end up in our oceans, and that's a good thing. One such discovery made the news this past week and was announced by Lakendra Pal and Lucian Lucia, professors in the Department of Forest Biomaterials. They identified that they have discovered how to convert leftover sawdust powder and agro residues into a styrofoam-like packaging material. Packaging and packing for shipment accounts for 36% of all plastic waste. And this is going to be a good thing. So we'll continue to support technology as a primary method of undoing this disaster. But until such time we reach that tipping point, our best options to limit the impacts to corals There'll continue to be a reduction in plastic packaging, reusable water bottles, and shopping bags, and properly disposing of plastic waste in recycling containers at recycling centers. It is also important to educate people about the dangers of plastic pollution and the importance of protecting coral reefs from this type of pollution. I would say at this point, if you don't know about the dangers of plastic pollution, you've been living in a hole. Now, you may not have understood the impact of coral reefs specifically, and here we have research that definitely points to that, but we've got to get better. And this isn't an environmental mission statement on my part. It simply means I love my corals, I love my tanks, I love my fish, and I want to keep them around. So the more we can do, the better. All right. Big news out of Florida, and I'm sure you guys have heard about this. We have on the May 10th and 11th this month, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission met to discuss proposed changes to non-native fish and wildlife import rules and how to regulate trade in Florida to help solve the issues of invasive species. Now, 2 proposals were presented at this meeting, and they've been around for a while and been in discussion. Option 1, a whitelist approach, which basically said all of these species are okay. It would only allow those species that are on a pre-approved list to be imported into Florida. And a lot of issues were rising about that or concerns about that, and also option 2, because that list was looking to be about just 100 species. Option 2 then is a risk-based approach, and this would require the Fish and Wildlife Commission of Florida to evaluate each species individually to determine if it's a risk of becoming invasive. Now, from what I've seen in the news, there's nothing out there about how this will be accomplished or when it will start. But I do know from this last week's update that Florida, their Fish and Wildlife Commission, has selected option 2, a risk-based approach, where each species will be individually evaluated. That's been done already. So we're going to have time, a degree of lag into our ability to have those fish on the market. This approach has been decided, but the discussions continue. There are many with open questions about the cost of these assessments. Who will bear the cost? Who will own the responsibility for prioritizing and kicking off these assessments? How long will they take? What will be the impact to the imports aquatic industry in Florida? I will tell you from other research I've done, our import businesses from 0 to 5,000, freshwater fish importing represents about 50%. It falls at around halfway down the list, which means it's more important than 50% of all imports we do is freshwater fish. Now, what does this decision mean? We're going to have to continue to monitor to find out. But I can, and we can, have a discussion about how do we get here. Well, Florida has a problem with invasive species. Also probably not news to you. We do know that there are some 500 plus non-native species that have established themselves in the Florida ecosystem, frequently just devastating native species in the process and causing Florida millions of dollars in economic damages each year. Some of the more prevalent species who have established a home in Florida include pythons, feral hogs, lionfish, cane frogs, and green iguanas. Now, on that list, I think we can point to pythons, lionfish, iguanas, and potentially cane frogs as introduced from the pet species. I don't know that there's anybody out there farming or raising or keeping feral hogs, but you can see that a large majority of this problem has come from the hobbies. The state has over 1,300 miles of coastline and it's home to many freshwater lakes and rivers. And Florida also has a number of artificial wetlands which have been created for the purpose of aquaculture. So the same warm climate and abundant water resources that are ideal for aquaculture in Florida have proven very attractive to most important species, and that is the root of the problem. There's more at stake than just ecology and the environment, though. Florida is a leader in the aquatic industry, both in terms of production and research in aquatics. The state has a long history of aquaculture, dating back to the early 1900s, and today Florida is leading states of the United States in 3 major sections or sectors of the aquatics industry. Number 1, production. Florida is the leading producer of ornamental fish in the United States. The state produces over 90% of the ornamental fish sold in the United States. Research. Number 2, Florida is a major center for aquatic and aquaculture research. The state is home to a number of universities and research institutes that conduct research on aquaculture, and this helps to improve the efficiency and sustainability of aquaculture production. Number 3, economic impact. Florida's aquatic industry is a major economic driver for the state. We all know that from all of the different companies that we see in our hobby, worldwide corals, etc. The industry generates $1 billion or billions of dollars in revenue each year, and it supports thousands of jobs. So, understandably, the meeting gathered a lot of attention in both the aquatic industry as a whole, as well as the aquarium hub, which relies on a large volume of livestock that comes through the state. What will happen? We'll have to report back on. Okay, there's a killer on the loose. The sea urchin killer has been exposed. From the scientific journals this past week, we learned more about the source that decimated the long-spined sea urchin in the Caribbean and along the Florida coast. Source from Science Daily, this news, first appearing in April of this year, highlights the rapid investigation and resolution from a team headed by Professor Breitbart of the University of South Florida's College of Marine Scientists. Best known for her contributions to the field of viral metagenomics, she and her team of researchers investigated the massive event of the sea urchin die-off event by collecting sea urchins from 23 locations around the Caribbean to study and isolate the cause. Admitting that they were beyond thrilled to get to the bottom of the January 2022 mystery, that being the die-off, and a bit stunned that they did so quickly, Breitbart shared that through their forensic investigation, they determined the cause to be a rare strain of a very common microscopic organism called a ciliate, or silicate. The specific species of ciliate, called a stucociliate, has been implicated in the die-offs of the marine species, such as sharks, in the past. So not limited to just sea urchins, this little booger gets around. The team was able to grow the strain in the lab and inject healthy, uninfected urchins, and shortly after administration of the organism to the organism, the healthy urchins exhibited the same die-off of the Caribbean. Specifically, urchins begin to lose their spines within days of contracting this unknown disease, and they die off in droves, such as witnessed in January 2022. So we've identified and replicated the behavior in the lab. One of the researchers on the team, Christina Kellogg, a microbiologist from the U.S. Geological Survey in St. Petersburg, Florida, who has worked extensively on coral reef diseases, noted, we're also curious about the fact that there is some overlap in some geographic areas where this die-off occurred and where corals are declining from stony coral tissue loss disease. In other words, it could be a contributor or a symbiotic type relationship that worsens the conditions. Even with the sources of the mysterious die-off uncovered, questions still remain. For example, is the ciliate new to the area, or was it there prior to the die-off? If it has been there, what environmental conditions favored its growth, and why did it infect the urchins? And can it affect other species of urchins, not just the long spine? Unanswered in the press release from Science Daily is what can be done about the stucociliates that exist in the water and what can be done to prevent further impact to the urchin population. The long spine sea urchin inhabit shallow tropical waters and feed off algae that would otherwise destroy them. This survival is crucial to the biome of the region, and we'll continue to monitor this story as it matures. In other news, huge clams, giant clams. Over on the Reef Builders website comes a story from Orpheus Island, Queensland, Australia. Pictures of the 40-year-old giant clam project from the Great Barrier Reef, initially seeded from broodstock in the late 80s. These Tridacna gigas clams were photographed during a low tide caused by the Sea Women Great Barrier Reef, a program that aims to strengthen the connection between Indigenous women and their traditional Great Barrier Reef sea country. Sea Women Barrier Reef was initiated in 2022 by the Coral Sea Foundation to facilitate training and networking of First Nations women from around the North Sea Park. So the clam species is capable of living up to 100 years. They can grow up to 4 feet across and weigh in as much as 440 pounds or more. The picture of these giant clams are unreal, showing off about 100 clams and even more empty shells. My personal experience with clams has been hit and miss. And with the end result being that I no longer have any clams in my tanks. So it's very impressive to see these monsters living the healthy life, and it gives me hope to try my hands again at these bivalve mollusks. Check out the story and the photos over at reefbuilders.com. Speaking of reef builders, one more great announcement. They announced a big welcome aboard to Evie Anderson as a senior field reporter. For those unfamiliar with Evie, she's been working with Fritz Aquatics for the last 4 years, supporting their manufacturing and business-to-business, aka B2B, client relationships. In addition to this, she's owned a saltwater aquarium store and has consulted on boutique custom builds for several high-profile tanks. We here at BTC are actually huge fans. Can't wait to see how she continues her growth in this new role. Last up, Aquashella arrived in Dallas this weekend. Aquashella is an annual industry trade show for aquariums, aquaculture, and marine life that has been around since about 2014. This year's events are being held here in Dallas, Texas, and Daytona, Florida, both of which have now completed. Previous years have included Chicago and Orlando stops, but the conflicts in scheduling have forced the loss of Chicago this year. No real word on the Orlando. Aquashella is one of the largest shows in our hobby and features a wide variety of exhibitors, events, and seminars. Visitors were able to find everything from the latest aquarium technology and accessories to educational seminars and discussions on conservation and sustainable practices. Things I enjoyed the most about Aquashella on my third year in attendance here in Dallas were the newest products, including CTAP, a new underwater glue that is based on the adhesion used by mollusks on ships. I had a chance to speak with David, the CFO, and he gave me a full demonstration of the product. I gotta tell you, it is impressive. So impressive, in fact, I bought a 2-ounce tube and used it on the corals I bought at the show as soon as I got home. More impressive to me, though, is with my background, having worked for the U.S. Navy in ship repair, at sea ship repair, and in dock ship repair, was word from David how the Navy is currently testing tile repair on Ohio-class submarines in water without need of a dry dock using this very product. I think it's going to be a revolution to the industry. I know they're not the only company that is working on this new discovery, but they are the first to market. And I got to tell you, already I'm seeing great things. It was much easier to use than cyanosilicate. It was much easier to use than even the epoxy 2-part that you mix together. It has a 30 minutes to 3-hour working time. It has a 12-hour hardening time, and it's fully cured within 48 hours. What's neat about that is that you can start placing corals, and if you decide that you want to change it, you're not locked into it. With that wonderful working time, you're able to pick things up, reactivate it, and remount it. So again, we'll do a deeper dive on this one in an individual profile, but here in last week today, I wanted to mention this is exciting to see CTAC coming to market as a new way to mount not only rock, but corals and anything underwater. Another thing I saw at the show this week, Dinkins Aquatic Gardens, they were here for their second year, and they caught my attention last year with a great solution for pods and phyto. Not only are they able to supply consistent supplies or support consistent supplies for my 300-gallon tanks, of which I have 2 now, they are also offer probably the most amazing subscribe and save discount that I think is unbeatable. I was ordering a gallon of pods, a gallon of phyto every 2 weeks, and I think I was saving something north of 30% per month on my deliveries. But that's last year's news. What's new? Well, this year, the husband and wife team, actually, it's kind of a whole family affair. I met their son there at Reef Palooza in the fall of last year, introduced Bergia Nudibranch for those looking to beat back Artesia in a natural manner. And I cannot tell you how big a deal this is. For years, I've been having to make shady deals over Facebook with strangers, meeting me in dark alleys to exchange my greenbacks for their little ketchup cups of water with little bugs inside. I can't tell you how excited I am to have a trusted company like Dinkins Aquatic Gardens enter this space with the ability to ship on demand. I think it's going to be a huge win for everybody in the hobby, as Aptasia is it's the magic ghost. It just shows up one day. You don't know how it got there, and then somebody's taking over your tank, and you're trying to use like these little sprays. And I don't know about you or your tank, but my 300-gallon tanks, I just can't reach anywhere inside the tank. And by the time I've seen it, the tank's so big, it's pretty well established. I've done filefish, I've done copper vein butterflies, I've done everything I can, and I've had some pretty good success. But Bergen nudibranch has been the best solution I've found, and I would use it more often. Only it's been so difficult to actually source. Now with Dickens Aquatic Gardens, I think that's a wonderful solution. Okay, so if you've never been to Aquashella, some other reasons to attend include industry leadership that share their experience and wisdom on stage and in person. There are hands-on contests for like kids aquascaping contests and the American shrimp contest. And finally, if you're up for shopping, there are some great deals available from hundreds of vendors. So hands-on experiences for visitors to explore. You got touch tanks, interactive displays, and more. Here on the screen, you can see some of the cool things going on. I did get to meet some aquascapists. Mike was amazing in his presentation. We'll again go through each of these in some individual profiles as time allows. But what a great year! What a great experience, and I can't wait to share more about it with you. So this is number one in the can. I appreciate your time, and I really look forward to talking to you guys again next week as we go through again looking at last week's news today. I'm Jason Troxel. This is Vet Friends Tanks and Corals.